They tell me when I speak my truth that I'm a racist. But I think I'm a realist. I've been on this earth long enough to know the difference between what they tell me and what they do. Whyteocracy in American political discourse or politics, they say is a word or a play on white supremacy and theocracy, which describes a system where the government claims to be a democracy, but is structurally designed to preserve the political power, cultural dominance, and economic privileges of the white majority. A whiteocracy in the context of U.S. democracy highlights the gap between foundational ideals and reality. They call it democratic rhetoric. I call it their narrative. The U.S. defines itself as a representative democracy built on the principle of one person, one vote, where power ultimately resides with the people. The reality of institutional barriers. Critics use the term to point out that large segments of the population, particularly Black Americans, Latinos, indigenous groups, face continual structural disenfranchisement. This includes strict voter ID laws and minority voting power. Historical architecture, the term also highlights that systematic inequalities are hard-coded into foundational institutions. The systems, like the Electoral College, which was originally designed in part to protect the influence of slave-holding states. But you see, we come to find out that we still are slave-holding states. To explore this critique, resources like the Brennan Center of Justice analyze how voting restrictions impact marginalized communities, while organizations like Southern Poverty Law Center provide research on systematic racism and white privilege in the United States. What democracy? We live in a nation that defines itself by its rhetoric. From its point of view, its narrative, from our founding documents to our modern political stages, the United States presents itself to the world as the global gold standard of representative democracy. But you still go over there and try to take those people or go tell them what to do. If you can't control it, then it needs to be destroyed. We preach the gospel of one person, one vote. We proudly champion the concept that power ultimately resides within the hands of the people, but the people have no hands. The people have no shoestrings to tie their shoes. And the people are scared. But when we look honestly at the history of our country, we are forced to confront a deep and political paradox. How can a nation build its entire identity on the ideals of freedom while systematically denying basic human rights to a large segment of its own citizens? To answer this question, contemporary political discourse has given us a vital analytical tool, the term whyteocracy. This is not a phrase designed for hateful or divisive rhetoric. Rather, it is a precise historical diagnostic tool. It is a play on two words, white supremacy and theocracy. It describes a system of government that claims the title of a democracy on paper, but is structurally, legally, and historically engineered to preserve the political power, cultural dominance, and economic privileges of the white majority. And why you calling me a racist? This is the truth. Today we must break down this word, look squarely at the mechanisms, and examine how the unwritten law of white supremacy has historically operated with the absolute, unquestioned authority of a state religion. Let us examine the second half of this word, theocracy. In a traditional theocracy, a specific religious doctrine is absolute. The law of the land is dictated by a higher divine authority. Any challenge to that doctrine is treated not just as political disagreement, but as a dangerous heresy. But when we look at American history, the absolute unchallengeable doctrine has frequently been the preservation of white European dominance. It functioned as an unwritten divine law. Consider the 19th century philosophy of manifest destiny. This was not merely a political policy, it was an explicit mainstream belief that European Americans were divinely ordained by God to conquer the American continent. Displace its indigenous inhabitants and govern over all other races. This pseudo-religious doctrine created a massive global double standard. It allowed the United States to lecture foreign nations about liberty, self-determination, and the virtues of democracy while simultaneously running an empire built on racial subjugation at home. While white supremacy is treated as an absolute doctrine, the suffering of marginalized communities is excused as a necessary sacrifice to maintain established order and systems. The theocracy enforces its doctrine through fear of damnation. A whiteocracy enforces its doctrine through physical terror. We cannot understand the modern state of American democracy without looking directly at its state-sanctioned violence that built its foundations for over 2 centuries. The American economic engine relied on the forced labor, torture, and systematic breeding of enslaved black human beings. Men, women, and children were legally defined as property, entirely stripped of their bodily autonomy to build the wealth of a nasty democracy. When emancipation threatened the hierarchy, the system adapted. Black codes, laws specifically designed to criminalize black freedom. Minor infractions like vagrancy were used to arrest black citizens, forcing them back into involuntary labor through the convict leasing system. When these laws weren't enough, public ritual terror filled the gaps. For decades following the Civil War, thousands of black citizens were subjugated to public lynchings, hangings, their cities destroyed. And you talk about somebody being lazy? No, you destroyed every time we took a step. You destroyed that step. You destroyed that upward mobility. It was deliberate, a political tool. It was used to enforce social compliance, dismantle black economy, autonomy, and terrorize black citizens away from the ballot box. It was a clear message. This democracy does not belong to you. As the decades rolled on and overt physical violence became less politically viable on the global stage, the mechanisms of the whiteocracy evolved. The terror did not disappear, it became bureaucratic. It moved from open fields into quiet halls of institutional policy. We see it in our government, in our schools. We see this clearly in the legacy of redlining. But I only have 18 seconds, and I will do a short video to fulfill and to finish this. But you know the truth.